Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be taking a look at the excellent Castlevania Bloodlines, the first and only title in Konami's famous series to make its way to the Sega Genesis back in 1994. It's the year 1917, and the evil Countess Elizabeth seeks to resurrect the long-since deceased spirit of her uncle, Count Dracula. In doing so, she takes part in a horrific ritual that ends up causing the First World War and grants her possession of the countless human souls she needed for the resurrection to take hold. It's now up to our two vampire hunting heroes, John and Eric, to take out the garbage and rid Europe of the infamous blood-sucking menace once and for all. Upon starting up a new game of Bloodlines, you're given the choice of which hero to play through the game with. First is John Morris, who's a descendant of the Belmont/Morris clan, armed with the famous vampire killer whip. And then there's Eric Lacard, Master Lanceman, who's seeking revenge against Dracula's niece for the transformation of his girlfriend into a vampire. The course of the game is essentially the exact same no matter who you decide to go with, but I've always been a huge fan of playing Bloodlines with Eric. His lance has great range and power, and he can attack at several different angles that can make short work of a lot of the bosses in the game. He can also do a really cool boosted jump by holding down on the D-pad before jumping, and it can end up getting you into areas that John couldn't normally reach. Though John does have the ability to swing across large gaps with his whip. There are 6 total stages in Castlevania Bloodlines, and each is sectioned off into several different parts, with each one culminating in an epic boss battle at the end. Unlike some of the later games in the series, this one doesn't take place primarily in Dracula's castle, but all over Europe. In between stages, you'll see a map screen that shows the next destination of your hero. As per usual, your default weapon can be powered up 2 times before reaching maximum range and damage, and in Bloodlines there's also a third power-up that can make your weapon even stronger. Thing is, this final hard-to-find power-up will only last until you get hit, but it sure is useful in the meantime. Special weapons play an important role in this iteration as well, with each being used by whichever button you set them to in the options. No more hitting up an attack to launch them, which is nice. For some reason, the heart items that have always served as special weapon ammunition are replaced by red and blue gems in this version. Most all of the weapon pickups are things you would have expected by now, like the Holy Water and Axe. New to Bloodlines is the bladed Boomerang weapon, but it basically just serves the exact same purpose as the Cross from Castlevania 1 through 4, although it's a bit faster and more angled when you throw it. The difficulty in Castlevania Bloodlines isn't really too much to deal with, though by that I don't mean in any way that the game is easy. It's actually quite challenging, but the thing about Bloodlines is that it's not full of cheap deaths either, like some of the earlier games in the series. Couple that with more frequent checkpoints per stage, a password system, and multiple continues, and you get a recipe for a much less frustrating game than some of the others. One thing worth noting about Bloodlines is how spot on the controls are. This particular Castlevania game has some of the smoothest and most responsive controls of any game in the series up to this point, even rivaling that of Super Castlevania 4. Another cool thing is that the two characters feel very different, and it's a different experience when playing through the game a second time with the other character, which totally adds some replay value to an already stellar game. Another interesting thing about Bloodlines was its level of violence at the time. This was really the first Castlevania game with any real blood and gore, and the European version ended up being censored quite a bit before being released. Funny enough, our uncut version still managed to pull a GA rating back in '94, which would be the equivalent to an E nowadays. I guess they were just a bit more lenient back then. Hell, even Splatterhouse 3 managed to get an MA13. The graphics and effects in Castlevania Bloodlines are really amazing to look at. The game is incredibly varied, and it constantly keeps you on your toes with its graphics. There are some really neat effects in the game that you just don't see very often, like having the screen sectioned off into 3 separate mirror layers in one area, and even one where you literally play the game upside down. The background scrolling effects are insanely well done, as are most of the awesome boss encounters. Bloodlines was definitely a game that really flexed the muscle of Sega's 16-bit console. The sound effects and music are just as impressive as the visuals, and the soundtrack itself was composed by Michiru Yamane, who you may know as the composer of another very popular Castlevania title, Symphony of the Night. There are some really amazing tracks here, and even some new versions of revered Castlevania favorites. As a matter of fact, the Stage 2 music from Bloodlines was later reused in several other Castlevania games. Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis is a real gem of a game. It's super fun to play with both characters, it has some wildly entertaining graphical effects, and one of the best soundtracks in the series' history. Bloodlines is another one of those games that most people don't instantly gravitate towards when talking about the best games in the franchise, but in my opinion, it's right up there at the top next to Rondo of Blood on the PC Engine. If you've somehow managed to miss out on playing Bloodlines on the Genesis, do yourself the service of picking it up as soon as you can. Bloodlines is certainly one of the best games in the expansive Sega Genesis library and definitely deserves some more attention. As always, guys, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for watching and subscribing, and until next time, stay classic.